Lady here, this wonderful lady here, if you don't know who she is, that's Dr. Mae Jameson. She's one of the main influences that really inspired me. Being able to see someone who looks like me in the field and reading her book. She had a book that she wrote called Find Where the Wind Goes, and this really inspired me to pursue the path that I'm going on. So that's that. And she says that science to me the sciences to me are manifestations of our attempts to express or share our understandings. So we're here to talk about culturally relevant science education with children. So what is culturally relevant science education? First, science, it deals in reason, logic, worldview. But whose worldview, whose reason, and whose logic? It's progressively being understood and expressed in various science circles that there's no such thing as a science. Every science is some form of ethnoscience. And ethnoscience means based on a culture and a worldview. And hopefully through this we'll be able to see that a little bit clearer. So this first picture here is a picture of me working with some kindergartners in the West Contra Costa Unified School District, and we're talking about the sun, the moon, and the earth relationship. We're talking about science. And looking at this picture, there's a lot of associations being created already. It's easy for us, when we think of the word science, we may have different ideas or different visions and pictures that come to mind. And especially for young children at this age, they're still developing mentally. We're all still developing mentally, but they are still creating a foundation. So they can create very broad associations. So when they think of science, they may think of a white lab coat, a beaker, complex words that you can't pronounce, or just different things like that. So in this picture, we have someone who looks like me, dressed like me, talking to them about science. So we can already imagine some of the different associations that may be being disturbed already in their minds. So next time they see someone who looks like me, dressed like me, walking down the street on TV, their mind may not put them in the box or the place that they've reserved for them already before. They may look at this person and say, oh, this is a thinking person. This is someone who has something to offer. And short of the ancient schools of Kemet or the universities of Timbuktu or even the researchers of the Dogon tribes about the stars, we can still bring out that ancient spirit that our ancestors already gave us of exploration and discovery by simply letting our genetic memories manifest itself. And I say genetic memories, in genetic research, we've already kind of figured out how DNA binds with itself, how it replicates itself, and how it even repairs itself. But that's not the whole thing. It's still more to it that we're still learning. In early childhood education, we have something called experience expected brain growth. And these are the experiences that children expect to go through, to develop. And if they go through these different experiences, their brains develop normally. Quote unquote normally. And according to the research, they say that it's not something the children are actively thinking about. It's something instinctually that they just expect to go through because of thousands of years of how humans develop and how raised human beings generally. So when they get to a certain age or a certain time in their life, they expect to go through certain experiences to develop normally, and they don't think about this consciously. It's just something that happens. This kind of sounds like a memory to me, a genetic memory that's going on. So taking that same principle and applying it to the African diaspora, for many thousands of years we've had empires, pyramid builders, all these different types of things. So with that being said, all we have to do is just allow ourselves to be, and these things can manifest itself. So before we even go on, I just want to say I'm also part of this African Gong. It's a Pan-African network, and it's involved in trying to popularize science communication across the Pan-African community. So if you're interested in this, you can contact me. You can jot down this URL. We can talk afterwards, give you all the information so you can get involved in that conversation. But back to what we're talking about, this idea of genetic memory. Let's take Michael Jordan, for example, in basketball. We know basketball manifested in Massachusetts from a guy named James Naismith. Now, this happened in the 1800s. late 1800s. So basketball wasn't created for Michael Jordan. It wasn't created for anybody that looked like Michael Jordan. But Michael Jordan learned all the rules for basketball and simply played the game. And we all know what Michael Jordan did. By simply just playing the game, he's revolutionized the culture. It's the same principle that we want to apply to science education and things of that nature. We know the systems, we say the systems aren't created for us, we know that. But we can still learn all the rules, and then simply by partaking in it, part of us is naturally going to show that African genius in us to manifest itself. And like Michael Jordan, if he would have gave himself the narrative that this isn't meant for me, this isn't meant for me, this isn't meant for me, and kept listen to that narrative, he probably wouldn't be as great as what he is. So we have to keep that in mind. We have to be careful of the narratives that we're giving ourselves, because as the subtitle says, background narratives, that's what we're going to kind of focus on, associations and background narratives when it comes to this topic of culturally relevant science education. So what narratives are we telling ourselves? What are the narratives we're telling ourselves? I want us to look at this first picture. And just naturally, as being human beings, when we see anything in front of us, we begin to try to make sense of it. We can't help it. We just begin to start trying to figure out the story that's happening, creating the story, or just looking at it to figure out what's going on. So we have that there. And then we have another picture. Again, there's a narrative being formed in our minds. We may not have words to it, but we already begin to give it a story. In both these pictures, one is hands-on learning in Africa, Madagascar. One is hands-on learning in Europe. And the one in Europe is this new trend in early childhood education and just child education generally of forest schools. That's what they're called, where they're taking away the borders, taking away the building, and taking children back to nature to learn directly from nature. It's really interesting to me because are both considered scientific? Do we consider both of them to be a scientific experience? And that's one thing we're going to be looking at, is just the association, because that's a very powerful tool when it comes to education with science with young children. I put this up here. This was kind of funny to me. I put it up there. One narrative we have to give ourselves when we're working with children is this narrative of no excuses. We can't keep giving excuses, oh, the system's not meant for you, this and that. We know these things, but we have to give the narrative of no excuses. I hear all the time in education circles, people talk about how the test and the whole system for school is really messed up and not meant for us, which is true. We understand that, we know that. But I don't hear about driver's license. People will go and get their driver's license. They will find a way. Matter of fact, how many people in here drive? We all drive, kind of? How many people have licenses? I want to see who's not. I'm not going to tell anybody, but we all have licenses. We find a way to get that license. We don't say and say, oh, the test, we might say the test is hard, but we still go and get that license because it's some type of intrinsic motivation for us to get that license. Whatever obstacles in the way, we know what this is going to mean for us, what we can achieve with it, we go and get that. And we don't even really pay attention to how biased the language is on the driver's test. We just, okay, let me just get that out the way so I can do what I need to do with it. So the narrative of no excuses, it's been done so you can do it also. That's the narrative we have to give our children, because when we give our children the narrative that, oh, the system's not meant for you, not everybody needs a scientist, not everybody can do science, they imbibe that and then they start to live that. Another thing that can really help us in this journey of getting to culturally relevant science is knowing the history of the environment that we're in. If you know a little bit about the history of the environment that you're in, be it the school, be it the neighborhood, be it whatever, even the topic that you're discussing, it gives you some type of power, some type of settlement within yourself to talk about the topic with confidence. And this is where we bring the idea of Sankofa. Sankofa is looking to the past. Sankofa brings wisdom and perseverance. And this idea of Sankofa is a very powerful tool when it comes to science education or education in general. It's a very effective tool. For example, when I was doing the degree in early childhood education, we had a project where we had to learn about the history of school in general in the U.S., how it came to be what it is today, what the original intents were. And through this project, I was able to understand what school actually means here in the U.S. where it developed that, and what were the original goals for the people who started to promote public schools here in the U.S. Understanding where it came from and seeing how it got to where it's at, I'm less likely to be confused by what I see in front of me, and I get to move with the topic with a little bit more confidence. And not to say that, oh, I'm going to come into a school and just forget what everybody else is saying, because at the end of the day, we're all scientists. And in science, we don't just dismiss any hypothesis. We still entertain a hypothesis no matter how outlandish or left field it may be. We still kind of give it its stage to understand it, and then we'll dismiss it if it proves itself to be false. So here's a little history of the environment that we find ourselves in today here in the land that we're standing now. Language of science in the U.S. In the U.S. education system, Latin is the main basis of scientific language exploration. The result is that the background narrative promotes European American worldview. And the importance of this, I'm juxtaposing it with China. In China, when it comes to any education, they teach them in their language. They teach science in their language in their schools. They teach math, all these subjects, they teach it in their own home language. As a result, there's no subconscious inferiority being created that when I start talking about science, I have to switch to a language that's not my own. Everything is motivating them to put their own culture on top, which is fine. It's fine for everybody to believe their culture is the #1 culture in the world. It's perfectly fine, and I want to liken it to basketball. If I have a favorite player, as you can tell, I like basketball already. Say I have a favorite player for my basketball team, and you have a favorite player for your basketball team, and somebody else has a favorite player for their basketball team. It's perfectly fine for us to say, my player is the best player in the world. And it's perfectly fine for you to say, your player is the best player in the world. But the issue lies when we're having this conversation and one party starts to tell the other one, your player never existed. Or they find a way to get them to be, like, hurt them on the court, and then they're suspended for the rest of the season. And then when you have the conversation again, they're saying, my player is the best, but then you say, oh, your player never existed, your player never played. That's where the issue comes in. Everybody deserves their time in the sun, pretty much. So the truth, if we all tell the truth about what's really going on, everybody gets a chance to have their time in the sun and everybody feels included. So again, the Chinese, they launched their tachyonauts, and that's what they call, what we would call here in the US, astronauts. They launched theirs into space. And they launched their tachyonauts up with tea, with traditional tea. They did a study with the Russian cosmonauts on health while they're in space and when they get back to Earth. The results, what they found out is that the Chinese tachyonauts were in a healthier state of being. Now, they wouldn't even have had the presence of mind to launch their tachyonauts up into space with traditional tea if they were learning about science and all this exploration in a language that was not their own. Because if we learn in a language that's not our own, we're learning it through a worldview and a perspective that may not be our own. So that's one thing that's really important to know, that different languages promote different thoughts and goals. And I put here's Dr. Abbas Fafungwa. He's a researcher, he's transitioned on now, but he was a very heavyweight researcher in education in Nigeria. And what his study was on was the idea that children learn best in a language that's closest related to them, their own language or whatever dialect of the language that they speak. They learn best in that narrative. He did a study where he put a group of people, allowed them to be taught in French and English, and he put another group of people, and they were taught in indigenous language. They were taught science and all these other subjects in their indigenous language. And as a result, after they brought them back to give them an evaluation, I think we all know which one succeeded and which one didn't. The one taught in their home language excelled far past the one that was taught in a language that was not their own. So I'm using this big contrast of the Yoruba language or the Igbo language with English, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a completely different language. It can just be a different dialect of a language or whatever style of language that if we speak English, if I speak a slightly different style of English and the child speaks a slightly different style of English, it's best that I teach them through that slightly different style as opposed to trying to teach them, okay, let's learn French now, I'm trying to learn French, the child's trying to learn French, and I'm trying to educate you about science in a language that we both aren't completely fluent in. So it's best to teach the children in a language they're completely fluent in, which also makes them feel a little bit more involved and see themselves in the topic. These are some things that we may know, but it's really important to revisit these things when we're talking about culturally relevant science education. Here's an example. This phrase, ayen lo, anto, is a Yoruba phrase. And if I'm going to do a literal translation into English, it kind of means that the world is going, the world is moving, and we're following it. Or the world is moving, we're spinning with it. In this phrase in itself, it connotates the idea that, and this is an old, ancient phrase in Yoruba, this connotates we understood the world is round and it's moving. Before, our cousins in Europe that decided that they started to understand it for their people, that the world wasn't flat, this is something that we already knew through our own observations and through our own thing. It was basic knowledge. So if you take away someone's language and you're not trying to teach them through a culture that's their own, this little bit of information that's just in the phrase, this is not me sitting down trying to teach someone heavy science. This is just a phrase that is properly said. This bit of information will be lost, and they wouldn't know that their people knew something that contributes to the whole knowledge of the human race. Again, this isn't a presentation to try to put anybody down, but it's just simply a presentation to put forth the truth so we all see it, and then now we can see ourselves in the science and work better with the sciences. So in the first slide, it said background narratives. Background narratives are very, very important. The importance of it. Every day when we wake up, there's a narrative being told to us. There's a narrative coming from our parents, our friends, our peers, ourselves. There's a perceived narrative that we think society is telling us, and there's a narrative that society actually is telling us. Two completely different things, and we understand it based off our own world, walk in life and experiences. But the idea is that all these narratives are constantly being told to us. Which narratives are we constantly telling ourselves? Because whatever narrative we're telling ourselves, especially when it comes to science education, is the narrative that we start to live by. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. Like what Michael Jackson said in the song Billie Jeans, the lie becomes the truth. Hey, 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 Billie Jeans, not my, okay, let me not go that way with it. But it's very important to pay attention to whatever narratives that we're telling ourselves. So if we're telling the child that, oh, it's okay, not everybody's good at science. Oh, it's okay, not everybody does this. We're kind of giving the child an excuse not to be successful in this topic. Instead of giving that narrative, we could start to open their mind like, okay, what type of sciences you might be good at? They might not be good at writing down the math equation, but they might be good at going outside and actually applying it through what they do with music or even anything else. So again, all these narratives that are being told to us, nature is also telling us a narrative. And nature is the origin of the science that we study. We're studying nature. Nature is the best teacher. Nature really is the only teacher. We try to be teachers, but nature itself is the best teacher. Nature's narrative was George Washington Carver's teacher. And if you don't know George Washington Carver, he's a very, very famous, he's also transitioned himself, but he was a very famous scientist, thinker. And when they asked him, like, how did you come up with all these ideas about plants and soybeans and peanuts? He told them, I talk to plants. So some people wrote him off as being kind of crazy, like, what, talking to plants? And wrote him off that way, but let's unfold what he's saying. He spoke to plants. Nature is telling us a story, but without words. Our cultures are what put the words to them from our own culture's goals and worldview. So nature itself is happening without us even saying anything about it. We're observing science all the time, but the moment we decide to start talking, our worldview and our culture is already playing a huge role in shaping that narrative that we communicate to other people. So we have to remember that at the very beginning of science exploration, culture is already playing a huge role in how it's being transmitted. And we have to understand it ourselves and be aware of that. Some of our first teachers telling us stories in nature are other animals. And we see this on the ancient walls. We see this narratives that we've already wrote up there from our observation of animals. So kind of went the David Chappelle. I really like him. He's really, really cool guy. It's an interview, so I just want to play this interview for us to. Will it play? Oh, there's no volume? Oh, so I have to narrate it?
No. You put subtitles?
Okay, let me start it over then.
It's so much bigger than money though, Dave. It's so much bigger than money.
I don't know what bigger than money. But you know what? I watched one of these nature shows one time, and they were talking about how a bushman finds water when it's scarce. And they do what's called a salt trap. I didn't know this. Apparently baboons love salt.
Okay.
So they put a lump of salt in the hole, and they wait for the baboon. The baboon comes, sticks his hand in the hole, grabs the salt. Salt makes his hand bigger, and he's trapped. He can't get his hand out. Now, if he's smart, all he does is let go of the salt. The baboon doesn't want to let go of the salt. Then the bushman just comes, takes the baboon, throws him in the cage, and gives him all the salt he wants. And then the baboon gets thirsty. The bushman lets him out the cage. The first place the baboon runs to is water. Bushman follows him, and they both drink to their fill. And in that analogy, I felt like the baboon. But I was smart enough to let go of the salt.
Isn't that a great analogy?
What an analogy!
I know.
He's talking about something totally different, but let's unfold that analogy that he put there, because we're trying to explore what are our cultural goals for science exploration, because every culture has a different goal of trying to understand their environment and then live better and communicate better with that environment. And from that is what creates our curriculums that we share with our children. So I want to show the actual video of what he was explaining. I just really like Dave Chappelle, so I had to play that.
The baboons always have a secret supply of water, and they're not going to tell anybody where it is. And when a Mahalahari ventures into the deep Kalahari on a hunting trip, he has to find water, because unlike the bushman, he doesn't know how to make liquid from a root. But he has his own way of finding out where the water is. First, he laboriously drills a hole in a giant antheap when he is sure a baboon is watching him, because he knows baboons are incurably inquisitive. Next, he puts some wild melon seeds into the hole and works them in so that they drop into a hollow. Then he saunters off, knowing the baboon is burning with curiosity. The baboon doesn't trust that human being at all, so he plays it cool. But he's dying to know what gives in that confounded hole. Finally, Mr. Inquisitive can't take it any longer. He's got to know what's in there. He reaches in, grabs a fistful, and now his hand's too big to come out. If he had the sense to drop the seed, he could free his hand. Now he lets go when it's too late. So that was a smart enough way to catch a baboon, but he still has to make it talk. Now he knows that salt is very scarce in this particular area, and that baboon is going to eat those lumps like candy. In fact, he has such a ball eating salt that he completely forgets he's under arrest. A mighty thirsty baboon. Next morning, the Mahalahadi goes to have a closer look to see whether his prisoner is ready to talk. He decides the brainwashing has worked, so he sets him free, knowing that in his condition, he won't care who follows him to the secret reservoir. Mahalahari has no eyes for the beauty of the setting. To him, water is beautiful.
It's pretty deep.
Yeah.
It's pretty deep. So I'm gonna make my attempt to translate the science we see here into terms that we are familiar with here in this side of the world that we live in. But before I do that, like, that's high level science that's being practiced right there. But again, language is a very important thing in understanding the history of words and how they work, because if you ask someone to say, oh, show me how you're conducting science, or show me something about science, they may say, oh, I don't like science, I'm not part of science, when actually they're partaking in it every single day and on a high level. So sometimes by us not understanding words and what they mean, we've already closed the door off in front of us from even exploring the topic. But let me go ahead and try my best to attempt to translate the science we see here. Starting off, psychology. We can do the psychology of another human being, but to understand the psychology of a baboon is something completely different. To understand that they are very curious animals. How do we understand that? Through observation. Someone has to sit down, observe how a baboon behaves, understand what its tendencies are, and see that this is a curious animal. Another thing, the purpose of science is for us to understand our environment so we can better live in the environment. If I find myself in an area that there's no water, it's scarce, I have to be kind of quick and witted to understand that, okay, if I see a deer or a baboon running around, they're obviously getting water from somewhere. So now how am I going to figure out the source of where they're getting this water from? Maybe at first you might walk, the baboon may not trust the human being, so it might just lead you on a goose chase, not showing you where the water is or the food source is. So you have to devise a plan of how can I actually get them to tell me what I want to know. We speak two different languages, but how can I get them to know? Again, patience, observation, trial and error, experiment with your environment. Eventually, the baboon, because it's a curious animal, we saw what happened, you created a trap for it, and then again, understand a little biology, understanding if you eat salt, you're going to get thirsty. And with this understanding and saying, okay, there's a breaking point. We all have a breaking point when we really just, we don't care what's happening around us, we're going to just go and take care of ourselves at the end of the day. That's what the baboon does, doesn't care who's following him. If he doesn't wait long enough, the baboon will still be thirsty but won't lead him to where the water source is. So through observation and through understanding the body language, okay, now is at its breaking point. Now it will tell me where the water is. And finally, physical science. You have to be fit to be able to keep up with the baboon. They jumping up, running around, you have to be fit. So all of these are high-level science being explored. But if we take someone in a more modern city area of the same area of the world and we tell them, oh, your culture does high science, they may not believe you because they have an understanding and a perception of what science is. So we have to unfold what science really is. Because once we unfold it and we give that narrative to our children, you're a scientist, you're a scientist, you're a scientist, and kind of reinstill them in their brain, after a while they start, you know what, this lady keeps telling me I'm a scientist, I probably am a scientist. And you start to kind of explore, what does a scientist mean? What does a scientist do? It's just like our names. There's a professor here at SF State, her name is Dr. Cool. And she's the coolest teacher. She walks so cool, everything about her is so cool. So whatever we repeat over and over again, and the associations we have with those words, we're creatures of habit. We start to live those words. So again, this helps us with culturally relevant science education. Once we can see ourselves in it, and we give the right, proper narratives to our children, they can start to see themselves in it a little bit better. So food for thought. Science, since people must do it, is a socially embedded activity. The most creative theories are often imaginative visions imposed upon facts. The source of imagination is also strongly cultural. And this is from Stephen Jay Gould's Introduction to the Mismeasure of a Man, 1981. I like that second sentence where it says the most creative theories are often imaginative visions imposed upon facts, and it's also strongly cultural. I liken this to prime colors. There's some prime colors. Every culture will look at these prime colors and kind of mix it in a slightly different way. No mix is better than any other, but those different mixes allows us to understand more of the characteristics of the prime colors, what those prime colors are capable of, which in turn brings us closer to a higher level of understanding of prime colors. So with this analogy, all the cultural variations are very important for us to uplift and explore so we can understand closer to the truth that we're seeking. I put this here to remind me, I've done something that happens often in academia. I made an assumption. I made an assumption that when I say science, we're all on the same page of what I'm talking about. And assumptions lead to confusion sometimes. In the field of physics, my field, which is the study of matter and its motion through space and time, all these symbols that I've put down here, they all have meanings, and sometimes they have various meanings. Physics uses math. If you didn't know, physics uses a lot of math. At the end of the day, math is just a symbolic tool used to describe physical phenomena. We need only agree on the working definitions for our symbols to make progress. So all these symbols here are symbols that we see all the time in physics, but if we're not working from the same working definition, my conclusion will be completely different from somebody else. And we may start arguing, no, but we're talking about science, but you have a completely different, so let's create a working definition that we're all working from. Again, we can't see it up there, but again, English comes from Latin. So when we look up English words and we look up the etymology of them, we'll find Latin sources. So the first one, science. Science, knowledge obtained about the world by watching it carefully and experimenting. And this comes from the Cambridge Dictionary. The etymology of this word, Latin, sciere, forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Latin is not my language. But it means to know. So if we understand that at the very core of science it means to know, now we have a working base where we can start to develop what is science and what's not science. Sometimes I like to have conversations with children about this. What's science? And they'll argue about it, they'll say me all type of different things, but none of them usually pull out what I like to call the Malcolm X principle or Malcolm Shabazz principle, where you will pull out a dictionary and start looking up the word that you're actually using to understand, okay, this is what the dictionary says. The dictionary may be different from my daily use of the word, but let's all get a working definition so we can build up from there. Next one, culture, comes from the Oxford Dictionary. The total pattern of human behavior dependent upon man's capability for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. The etymology of this word is colere, care for, place, tilled, like in agriculture. And it's interesting, my research, again, we're all scientists in here. If you find research that's different from mine, I'm happy to sit down with you, discuss so we can get there. But it started off as an agricultural metaphor. So the word we use in culture is actually an agricultural metaphor that we use all over the place now. And it was first noted principally to be used for the development of philosophical soul by ancient Roman orator in his book Tuscane Disputationis. And it's interesting to know that this started off as a metaphor. Education, information about or training in a particular subject. Oxford Dictionary, basic. We can agree on that. There's two etymologies, there's two roots that we can find. One is educare, which means to train or to mold. The other one is educere, to lead out or bring out latent potential. Now, me personally, I kind of identify with that first root a little bit more, to bring out latent potential. This starts to sound like the African philosophy of how human beings, when we first come into this transition of living, they're coming already with instructions, already with an agreement to what they're going to manifest in this side of life. And my role as an educator is not to fill this new human being with something, but to unfold what they have already planned to experience in this life. And again, curriculum. You can't really see all of it up there, but it says any program or plan of activities. The course of a race or a run is the etymology of the word. Curriculum, that's a very important thing that we have to develop if we're going to do culturally relevant science education with children. So let's look at the basic steps of curriculum. Diagnosis of need. We have to know what the need is. We have to know what we're looking for, what our goal is. Formulation of objectives, selection of content, organization of content, selection of learning experiences, organization of the learning experiences, and then finally determination of what to evaluate and the ways and means to do it. So for example, let's take, if we have a diagnosis of need, say a child, the diagnosis of need is the child has a fear of being upside down. That's the diagnosis. The child has a fear of being upside down. We need to formulate an objective. Okay, how are we going to aid in this? Okay, teach the child how to do a backflip. The child can learn how to do a backflip, because if he can learn how to do a backflip, or she can learn how to do a backflip, that fear of being upside down might be offset a bit. So a selection of content. Okay, you need someone who knows how to do a backflip, probably some cushions, soft areas, anticipating if the child's going to fall or not. Then you organize the content. Okay, how are we going to, what's the order of how we're going to present this? Then selection of learning experiences. Okay, maybe they need to learn how to do a handstand first. After they learn how to do a handstand, then we can start maybe tilting them to go backwards. It's all a progression. And if we organize the learning experiences, as we said, they do a handstand first, then we have someone kind of guiding them how to get their body used to flipping backwards. And then determination of what to evaluate. I chose the backflip because it's very easy to evaluate. The moment they can do a backflip, that means that fear of being upside down has been alleviated on some degree. This is the same approach we want to use when working with developing culturally relevant science education with children. We have to have a goal already in mind. What do we want to see manifested out of the children? Or what are we trying to teach them? So questions in curriculum. Who is developing our curriculum? Are we using school for what it is, or are we being used by school? This comes from an understanding of what school is. If you do a little bit of research and understand the original intent of schools here in the US, you can use it a little bit better instead of just going through the motions of being used and tossed either way by school. So again, Sankofa, looking back to the past so that we can understand the future. November 11, 1647 is attributed to the Puritans. Again, this is my research. If you find research that's different, we're all scientists, so I like to share your notes, see my notes, and we can get to closer truth. But according to my research, the Puritans were the first in the US to point out the need for public schooling. And they established schools to teach basic reading and writing and math, but also reinforce core values. So with that understanding that the schools here in the US were created to reinforce core values, what core values are we trying to reinforce with the children? Pay attention to that so we can move forward. Are we educating our children in science? What are the parents' goals, teachers' goals, school goals, and child's goals? And if we remember that education's root meaning is to bring out potential, it's easier for us to see that the intrinsic drive is the best fuel for success when it comes to the child. Once they can see themselves in it, just like I showed you, once I saw myself through Dr. Mae Jameson, I had this intrinsic drive to keep doing whatever obstacles I'm facing. Somebody else that looks like me has done it already, so I can do it too. So representation in science. I think we're all familiar with this equation. This is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. What is this theorem called? Like the Pythagorean theorem. I like those quotes. I like those air quotes, the Pythagorean. But you know, not to take any discredit from him, but we're just kind of taught this formula to memorize it. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's how I learned it. I learned the formula first, didn't really understand the application of it. I just know that, oh, you give me some triangle shape, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Sometimes I would make the c not the longest side, it would be the shortest. I just knew this formula. But later on we need to understand that a squared, what that means is just a squared. You take one side and you square it, it makes a box. So if you take one box plus another box, those two boxes will equal a third box. And what's interesting is that in some research that this is one of the principles that the pyramid builders used to get such precise measurements. Pythagoras. It is known that Pythagoras traveled to Egypt about 535 BCE to further his studies. This is an Encyclopedia Britannica. This is a very credible source, the Encyclopedia Britannica. So this kind of just lets us know a little bit of information about where he got his form of how he understood it and brought it back to his people to further the math. But again, sometimes the answers are right in front of us. I was in a math class, and when I had already decided that I wanted to go down the path that I'm going, I was trying so desperately to see myself in the math that I'm taking. I wanted to find that inspiration. So, you know, sometimes if we all take a math class, the teacher is a big math book, we see some examples, we just look at the example and answer the questions. All these little side paragraphs, and that has nothing to do with this. We just answer our questions, be done with it. I said, let me venture to the side. Let me read these side paragraphs. So when we were learning this equation, I read the side paragraph. And right there in front of me, in front of the book that we're all using, it says, Pythagoras went to Egypt. And then we're dealing with triangles, and I know that triangles, you know, so I started thinking. It didn't tell me everything, but it just stated, Pythagoras went to Egypt and stayed there for about 20 years or so. So I started thinking to myself, you know, Pythagoras, Egypt? And that was the spark that got me to start to see myself in this math. Because one of the excuses we create to our children is that, oh, this math is outside of you, or whatever the case may be. But if you start to see yourself in it, you don't have that excuse to say, I can't do this. Because the math comes from me. I have to be able to do it. And the same thing happened to me with algebra when I learned the history of algebra and learned that it wasn't created in the US. And I started, wow, this is pretty cool. There's a lot of amazing cultures contributing to this thing that we call math. And just seeing everybody put on the same table gave me confidence to say, you know what, I belong here. And it's really important. All Hidden Figures. I think we've all seen that movie Hidden Figures, maybe some of us, but anyways, a movie about some ladies, some African-American ladies who went into NASA and just are core foundation reasons why we still have a NASA program. And it was information that wasn't really presented to us before. So this is really interesting, and all motivational things. This here, an example of ethnoscience. One of my mentors, she works at California Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and they took a group of indigenous people of the land here, and they brought some Western Eurocentric researchers. They brought them together to sit down and discuss. I brought the book here, so after you can look at it. But they brought them down to sit and discuss the ideas of science, and understanding that example that I used of prime colors, that every culture's remix of those colors is going to help us to understand what we're all looking for a little bit better. So they understood this principle. They sat down and started discussing their own worldviews. The one I want to point out right here, it says, according to the indigenous worldview, nature is honored constantly through daily spiritual practice. And in the Western view, it says, spiritual practices are apart from science practices. And I was like, why is this the case? I'm not to say anyone's better than the other, but why is there a separation here? So then I started doing the research. So a theory that I started to develop was a theory into why there was a split between spirituality and science in the Western world. Research led me to the Galileo and the church. If people know who Galileo is, he's a really popular, he's also transitioned himself, but he's a heavyweight when it comes to astronomy and research. He studied the moons of Jupiter and put forth a lot of ideas that were really cool. So at the time, Galileo and the church, they were beefing. They didn't like each other. They were beefing. Galileo was making comic books talking about how the church was simple-minded people that can't think. The church was putting Galileo on house lock, house arrest. They were just going back and forth. Galileo had friends in like France and places like that would say, you know what, just come chill with us. You know, we don't have to deal with all of this other nonsense. They let you do your research. He's like, no, this is my hood. This is where I'm from. I'm staying right here. He stayed right there until the day he passed away. But anyway, the point is that when you are such a high-level person, you have a big reach, and you have followers, and followers that speak intellectually. I think we all know who Beyonce is. She has a huge beehive, and in that beehive, she has people who can speak very intellectually and convince you of all types of stuff. Same thing with Galileo in the church. He had followers that perpetuated this idea that spirituality and church had to be separate. They don't know what they're talking about. We know what we're talking about. That combined with fixed mindsets with far reaches, again, celebrity scientists, that promote the idea that these two things are very separate. They're very separate. They don't belong together. In early childhood education and just childhood education, we try to promote to have a growth mindset. which is accepting new ideas and also accepting that you may not succeed at first, but you'll try again. We don't promote to have fixed mindsets. We promote the children to have growth mindsets. And a lot of these celebrity scientists have that fixed mindset that they already understand that their research, there's no spiritual force at hand. But here's a professor from MIT. His name is Troy Van Voorhis. He did this study and said, do you agree with the statement? The teachings of science and religion often ultimately conflict with one another. When he did this study with people between the age of 18 to 23, the answers was 70% agreed that the two things strongly conflict with each other. About 25 said disagreed, but again, the majority said that yes, they agree that these two things are separate. But the reality is, only 11% of Americans belong to a religion that denies the findings of modern science. And even with the scientists themselves, 52% believe in God or a higher power, 7% are unsure, 41% just don't believe. So this point is to say that the perception and reality are two different things. The perception we think society is telling us is that spirituality and science are separate. That's the perception based off of what we've been fed, but the reality is actually different. And again, promoting science research based on logic and your own experimentation. If you don't know something, go find it out. As my dad would tell me, he would say, if I didn't know a word, he would just say, okay, look it up. You figure it out. Like, he wouldn't just tell me the answer. I would have to do the research myself. At the time, I didn't like it. I was like, oh, it's making me look at stuff. Can I just have the answer? This is a quick little answer. I'm trying to get to the next thing. No, I have to stop and then do that research. This was preparing me to be a scientist, to be able to look, research things that I don't understand, and go through that little bit of frustration. So again, really quickly, Carl Sagan, he's a big heavyweight in science. Again, he's a huge heavyweight. Just look him up, Carl Sagan. And he's also transitioned himself, but he says the notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both. This is a heavyweight in science telling us this. And then Nikola Tesla, hands down one of my favorite scientists ever. Nikola Tesla, one of my favorite. He says, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. I like this quote, and I see it all the time. One time, some of my study buddies that are here, we will go through an equation trying to figure out the answer, and we can't figure it out. So we'll wander off into la-la land, creating some fanciful answer, and it makes sense with the logic we followed, and we spend so much time on it, we'll be like, okay, that's the answer, yeah, we're just gonna keep that. We wander so far away from reality, and we just, since we spent so much time and effort, we just leave it with that and say, this is the answer, this is what we're gonna go with. But what Nikola Tesla says is that it's dangerous to completely substitute equations for reality. We have to keep everything based on observation and experimentation. So language is highly symbolic, science and math symbolic as well. And we have to see past the equation when we're working with children. One thing I want to say is that from understanding the idea that the moment we start talking about science, our culture is already involved, and language is highly symbolic. The moment we start to just talk in general is poetry. Every word we talk is poetry, a form of poetry. So science is poetry. So here are some methods in actually working with children. Why do the things work that work? I watched the documentary on Lisa Left Eye Lopez of TLC, and she was talking about the song Waterfalls, that they made, really popular song. She said that if any other group sung that song, it wouldn't have had the same impact that it had when TLC sung it. And the principle she's getting at is that because she connected with that song so well, she even spoke about what she was experiencing as she was writing those lyrics. So when she delivered those lyrics, it resonates with us in a different way than someone who has no connection to it. So why does the things work that work? That connection factor is a huge reason. Here's paraphrasing Lillian Katz. She's a heavyweight when it comes to science education with children. She says that the studies in early childhood education show that a greater indicator to child success in school is not what they are taught per se, or even what they remember about what you teach them, but more so the connections that are made from the child with the teacher. So they're saying that a child that has a strong connection with the teacher in the early ages they're not going to remember all the things you teach them, all the ABCs, and they may remember the ABCs because you repeat it, but when you get to that age when you realize that the ABCs there's no reason that it has to be in that order. But anyway, the idea is that the connections that the child makes with the teacher is more important than per se what you're teaching them, because again, we teach ourselves. When a baby is learning to talk, the baby is the one who really teaches themselves how to talk and teaches themselves how to walk. If they're not ready to walk, they will not walk. And when they're talking, when they learn how to talk, they don't have the basis of language already in their mind. They're formulating all these things already. Babies are some of the greatest scientists because they're constantly exploring, experimenting with their environment. So with that being said, we don't really need to focus so much on like this child needs to learn this equation, that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. They don't need to learn it and drill it in their mind. Yes, they may be able to regurgitate it back, but when they're asked to use it creatively or explore a new answer to an issue, they won't be able to do it because all can do is just regurgitate what you taught them. So again, methods in science education, connect to it first. Then we have to be aware of our own bias through education experience. The casual approach sometimes is overlooked, but it's very important in the process of working in science. Just casually talking to the child, learn about the child's likes, they learn about you, and you eventually find some medium where, okay, we can both do this project. Because you don't ever want it to be the child is completely interested in the project, you as the educator, you're not. Or you're super interested in something, the child has no desire to learn. You have to casually talk to understand the child a bit, then you create a project. The project approach works really well. And then play, laughter, song, and dance cannot be overlooked. Because what happens when we're playing, laughing, singing, and dancing, or doing things we like, dopamines are released. And dopamines is a chemical in our brain that's responsible for the pleasure. So the more we have pleasure released in our mind, it makes us want to revisit the activity. And I don't want to say really, oh, the child needs to just have fun. No, the thing has to be addictive. Make it addictive. When we get to the higher levels of working with physics, we're not having fun trying to figure out this one question that takes 5 pages. I'm not exaggerating at all. One question takes 5 pages. We're not having fun. It's hard, we want to go home, we're still in the lab, but it's addicting. We've had that release of actually figuring out an answer on our own. Not giving the child an answer or someone giving us the answer, we figured it out. And when you have that release, it's addicting. You want to revisit it again. Sometimes we mask it with the word fun, and we see the child's not having fun, so we're like, oh, we have to do something different. But observe a child outside when they're playing certain video games. That's very difficult. You see the frustration on their face, but the thing is addicting, so they keep revisiting it and revisiting. So we want it to be addicting. And actually with drugs, that's what they put. They put substances in the drugs that promote the release of dopamine to make it addictive, to tell our brain we want this more. But anyway, here's a project that I was fortunate to do with a group of second graders. Pyramid project. Casual talk. We were talking about just different things we like, and we got onto the topic of pyramids. And the children were like, oh, pyramids are from Egypt, they're from Egypt. Well, I was working with a group of children who 90% of them were from south of the border of the US. So then I said, okay, let's pull up some pictures of pyramids around the world. And once they saw the pyramid of Mexico, they was like, Mexico has pyramids. They got so excited because a lot of them come from Mexico. And about 50% of the children came directly from Mexico. And the other, I gotta get my math right, 50% plus 50 is 100. I said 90% earlier. Other 40% of them came from another place south of the US. And they all got excited about this project. I didn't have to buy it anymore. They bought themselves into it. Here we see acorns added to the moon pyramid. I started to tell them that pyramid builders, when they're building these pyramids, it reflected their culture and their environment. They took this principle on their own recess, went outside, picked up acorns and different things in their environment because they want their pyramids to reflect their environment. They brought it in, put it on the pyramid. I was excited. I was like, wow, this is cool. The other groups, it was the moon pyramid, the sun pyramid, the temple pyramid. The moon pyramid did this, all the other pyramids started to, I want to do this too. I had them keep journals. The first journals that they kept were very abstract periods of just triangle. But as they got to involve themselves and just work with the project, they would come in on their own time at recess, do the paper mache, do the different color and painting. And when they kept their journals, it started to get more detailed because now they're spending time with the project. We watched, and what happened was one of the parents of the children was a carpenter. So the child will come home excited about the project, and that excitement is contagious. If you're excited, everybody starts to get excited. The dad built a big step pyramid and wheeled it into class on his own. And the kids got so, their eyes lit up, and we just painted it. And so this was a really pleasurable experience. We all got to be immersed in this culturally relevant education. Here, Mayan math. The Mayans had different symbols for numbers, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they had different symbols. So what we did is we just took those symbols, remixed it with the symbols we know, like the subtraction sign, addition sign, just so the kids can see that math is a cultural experience as well, and see that not everything is the way that we see it before. But again, the children will come in at their own time and start to spend time with the project. I was no longer relieving the ball. They will come in on their own time and just kind of meditate with the project. So something interesting happened. I no longer was the teacher. The thing itself became the teacher. And that's the goal we want to get. Once the thing itself becomes a teacher, all of my bias, all of my cultural everything, it gets removed and their culture gets put on top. Their interpretations of it gets put on top, their worldview. But we just have to present the environment for them to do that. So, again, there's a research, one of the professors that was in here earlier at the lead, her and I are doing a research on teacher phobia in science education for pre-K to 6th grade. And the idea is current studies to identify it, address the factors, and explore possible remedies. These three things are things that pop off in real life with educators. We know that there's a fanciful idea of what educators are, and there's a real life thing what educators of children are. Confidence. If you don't feel confident in science, you might start to have a side effect of avoidance and blind mirroring, which means you just go through the motions and whatever is presented for you, you just do it. You don't want to involve yourself too much because you don't feel confident about the topic. But if you see yourself in the science, you'll feel a little bit more confident. Time. Educators don't have time. It's just facts. They have to do all these IEPs, they have to do all these meetings, all these grades, deal with this person, deal with this person, deal with, just so much thing on their plate all the time. They may not have time. And the side effect of that is the quality of the project that they do and just maintain a status quo. Okay, how can I just get to the bare minimum so I can get past all the other things I have to do? And the last thing is interest, as we discussed before. If the teacher's not interested, if the children's not interested, moving through the motions. So again, these three things are things we've already identified, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can alleviate it and make it easier through teacher trainings to make the teachers feel better about the subjects and also see themselves in the subjects. So these are the references I use, so that's what I have to say right now, and look forward to let's having a conversation about what we just talked about. Thank you. Yeah, questions. Any questions, discussions? No. Yes.
In terms of like teacher phobia and teaching in science within science education, how are there any solutions in your case to like fix that?
Yeah, we're exploring some of the solutions. We don't have to have one yet, but some of the things that we know is starting to move in a general direction is when it comes to science education with pre-K to 6th grade, they have a lot of teacher trainings and different things like that. But then the motivation for going to these teacher trainings is not quite all the way there towards what it should be. The motivation is like, okay, we're gonna get paid this amount for this, let me just show up, get this stamp that I went to this, and not even paying attention. I myself gave a teacher's training, and it was that setup where they would come, they just have to sit there for 40 minutes, and then you're gonna get paid like a day rate or something, and just waiting, and then left. And it was so funny that some of them even retain anything. So the structure of teacher training, we know that's also one of the problems. Not the structure doesn't appeal to everybody. So we're trying to say, look at teachers, interview them, see, okay, what ways do you assimilate information better? What ways are you inspired better? Not like, let's put it in the same structure. For example, there's this thing in China called Angie Play. It's relatively new, Angie Play. They took researchers from here from the US, went to China. Has anybody seen the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? I saw like half head nod, so you guys are really gonna feel me. The same town that they filmed that movie is the same town, Angie. So that's where this play is being developed. So it's a very beautiful location. the researchers here went there, they observed how the teachers teachers worked with the children, pre-K, kindergarten. And they gave their notes, and then at the end they said, oh, everything's cool, but it doesn't seem like the teachers were really interested in working with the children. They were so distant. And the teachers of Andrew Play, the Chinese teachers, they said, okay, let's do an activity. I want everybody to close their eyes and imagine their favorite play as a child, their favorite moments of enjoying something. They all closed their eyes, and when they said, how many of them involved an adult? None of them said not one. Even us thinking about our favorite play, none of them involved an adult. So the reasoning was that the children are very capable of regulating their own play, dictating their own terms of how the play is going to be carried out. I just shared this example to say that that mode works for them of how to work with their children. Not every single mode works, and we have this like pretty much same generic mode of teacher training when it comes to science education that we want to break off and look at different things. One of the things we found so far is that people, they drive to work. A lot of teachers drive to work. As they drive, they listen to music, listen to CDs. So we're trying to say, okay, maybe we can make a CD and make it kind of entertaining. Make it have comedians on there to crack some science jokes or teacher jokes that the teachers will relate to, get that buy-in. Like, okay, yeah, they feel me, I don't have time, and you know, that type of thing. So find new approaches that it's easier for them. They don't have to, okay, let me go to this place and sit down for 40 minutes. In my casual day of life, I can just expose myself to this information. So that's one of the ways we're trying to look at it. Any more questions, comments? Yes.
Yeah, about youth colleagues. It seems like your background, your work is in primary and secondary school.
Yes.
Do you feel like similar things going on for college and university level science teaching, even like kind of basic requirements like that undergraduates have to take?
Again, I would say there are some similarities of just being stuck in the motion of like the same motion over and over again. That the way the information is presented sometimes I think is the same. It's the same principle, because at the end of the day, all of our education starts from the primary. We all went through the primary system, and the primary system is still very similar to the college system. Everybody sits down like this. Everybody looks at the teacher this way. So it's still based off that foundation. So I see parallels. And since I don't focus really on the university level, I can't get into more detail, but I definitely do see parallels. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
I was wondering, there's been, particularly with elementary schools that have kind of different language focus,
Yes.
like, do you see more of the cultural relevance kind of in those situations?
Yes, actually I do with the schools that promote the use of different languages. I see the children in the classroom speaking different languages in the midst of trying to learn the material. I see some of them translating the science to their classmate that they both speak English, but they'll translate into like Spanish or something while the session is going on. Before I didn't see that before, but now I'm starting to see that more, and I think it's a really cool thing to see. And also, some of these children are very vocal. They'll tell you like, oh, this is boring. I don't want to do this. And I can say that because I was one of those students. So I can't even get mad when the students say that to me. Like, what do you mean you don't want to pay attention? And I think back, oh yeah, I was the one raising my hand saying, okay, I understand this shape, but how is this going to help me working at McDonald's? Or how is this going to help me get this, you know, how is this going to help me? I was the smart kid in the class saying those things. So when I see them, I can't help but laugh. But yeah, they're very vocal. They're very vocal. And they'll tell you if they like something, if they don't like something, if they want to pursue something. But again, the one thing I'm seeing is that compromise. Like, okay, find something interesting for the children, but also interesting to you, so you can both compromise. Because some of the issues, like, let's just find what the children are interested in, the teacher's not interested at all, so the quality isn't there. But again, I am seeing it with the give and take that's happening now in the school districts. I see it's definitely trending towards the right path of letting the child feel like I can talk about the subject in my own language that I feel most comfortable with. Yes?
Well, I'm curious about how are teachers assessed in their role as being a teacher from K to 12, especially when it has to do with science education. Like, we know the requirements to get into, I guess, being a K to 12 teacher, but
yes.
Are they being assessed and how they're being assessed, and what are you all thinking about ways to kind of evaluate them and stuff like that?
Well, one of the ways that they do get assessed is kind of based on the child's performance in the class. If the child, and I've seen sad cases where actually schools, they would help the children to do well, so it kind of indirectly reflects that they're doing something well. So that's one way that they are being assessed that I know personal direct experience with, because I was a substitute for the Western Contra Unified School District, pre-K to 12, all subjects. So when I see it, that's one of the ways I see it, that it's based on the child's performance. That's one way they're being assessed, is based on if they're at this level, and do they increase this amount or do they increase that amount, and it's just a numbers game with them, and it's pretty much the same format. I think a better way would be, more of a conversational approach, and seeing how this teacher feels with the topic, seeing how the children are reacting with it, because we all know the tests don't reflect. I'm gonna share a quick little example. I had to take a class in the grad program. I took a class, A, first exam, A, second exam, A, average on homework, B, average on quizzes. Finals times came, I studied the complete wrong information. Final came, got an F on the final, F minus. Pulled the C plus in the class, but then because they're looking at that grade like, oh, he doesn't know this subject, he's struggling. I was like, no, I actually really do understand the topic, it's just that. So it's not always the best indicator, I guess, but I mean, that's what it is right now. Unless other people, I know some people in here have experience with the way teachers are evaluated and viewed, and we can always have that conversation later. I would like to, fill my bank up a little bit more with that information.
I couldn't see. Sorry.
Any more questions? Comments?
Thank you for this. So that on behalf of the Africana Studies Department, we would like to present the certificate for your Bongi talk and hope you do this often.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.